Welcome everyone to Earth Week 2021, brought to you with collaboration between Central Hall Commons and Piscataquis County Democrats, the Education and Outreach Committee. We are both committed to expanding knowledge about climate change and promoting discussion of what we can do about it. I would like to recognize that we are on land occupied for thousands of years by the Wabanaki people who believe they belong to the land rather than the land belonging to them. And we are grateful for the use of this land and regret and apologize for our failure to understand this truth. This week's events focus on discussion of the Maine Climate Council's plan called Maine Won't Wait that was released by the governor in December of 2020. It outlines the strategies that Maine can take over the next 4 years to reduce carbon emissions and create a more sustainable future for Maine. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Leslie Furno. I'm the president of Central Hall Commons, and I am also a member of the Equity Subcommittee appointed by the governor to ensure equity in the implementation of the climate plan. So I'm very happy to be here with you. So tonight we're going to be looking at strategy D, and in particular focus on solar energy. And this strategy will be introduced by Carol Boothroyd, who will then introduce the speakers. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Carol.
Thank you, Leslie. So transforming Maine's energy sector is so crucial to our solutions to the climate crisis that they're actually included in 2 of the strategies of the Maine Climate Action Plan. Strategy C is about reducing carbon emissions in Maine's energy sector, and strategy D is to grow Maine's clean energy economy. So they focus a little bit differently, but they're both important parts of the Climate Action Plan. You may know that Maine is a member of a cooperative effort to limit greenhouse gas emissions with 10 other states, which is called the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and it focuses on the power generating sector. And a renewable portfolio standard, which is called an RPS, establishes the percent of electricity that a supplier must provide from renewable sources. Maine has increased the state RSP to 80% by 2030. That's quite an ambitious goal. And then they have a goal of 100% renewable electricity by 2050. Solar electric generation plays a large part in reaching these goals. According to the Climate Action Plan, Maine spends about $4.4 billion every year on fossil fuels. So alternative clean energy solutions will help keep those energy dollars in Maine, which will have a positive economic impact and opportunities for new jobs while reducing emissions. So tonight we're going to welcome 3 guests, only 2 of which are here right now. They all have experience with alternative energy projects. Tyler Atkins is the Chief Revenue Officer of UGE International, which specializes in commercial and community solar solutions. And he's also a member of the Select Board in Monson. So welcome, Tyler. We were going to hear from Bob Kenny, who's the town manager in Milo, but he had a conflict. And so Peter Hamlin has graciously agreed to step in, and he is the former chair of Milo Select Board. And I understand from Bob that Peter was instrumental in Milo's solar project. And last of all, we have Jack Kluge, the town manager for Dover Foxcroft. And Jack sent a message. He had a conflict. He will be here, but he'll be here later in the program. So we'll be watching for him. So Tyler, would you like to start off the conversation with your experiences in the solar industry, which I know are extensive? Oh, you have to be unmuted.
Here we go. Thanks. Sorry, I was trying to figure out which alarm bell do I ring here? Yeah, no, thanks. In small communities, we all wear many hats, and it just so happens that in the solar world, I wear pretty much all of the hats, sitting at various seats at the table, depending on the set of circumstances. So, um, as Carol mentioned, my day job is as a community solar developer. We do projects in Maine. Our office, our headquarters is actually in New York. So we do projects out of New York. A number of years ago, when I returned to Maine, I convinced my boss at the time to let me work remotely from here because we would be able to develop projects in Maine. It was during the LePage administration, so that actually wasn't entirely truthful statement. Yeah, but I knew that development takes some time, and we knew that things would change. We didn't know how quickly they would change and how dramatically they would change. But it all worked out very well in the end. Being in the right place at the right time. So we're doing a lot of stuff in Maine. We'll talk about that. Community solar, as all energy, is very policy dependent industry. So the feasibility of what we're doing is not really a matter of latitude or sunlight or weather. It's really about how the policies come together to allow for what is on its own the cheapest form of energy on Earth already. Solar is the cheapest form of energy on Earth. But how do these other factors stack on? How do the impacts of policies layer on to make it either competitive or not competitive versus other energy supplies? So the good news is that around the country and around the world, the policies are moving quickly in the right direction, not uniformly. It's a 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of landscape, but overall very much moving forward. And in some places you might not expect. So yeah, so the landscape is great. The other piece here is so Maine specifically has become the cool new kid in the solar industry nationwide. And so we can talk about some of the reasons why that might be the case. And then lastly, taking that hat off for a second and putting on my select board hat. Monson did last year switch to solar for our own municipal use. We did a small system that is a third party owned system where we buy the power for, we're not a big town, so we have the town office, the dump, the gym, etc. And so we can talk about what that process was like for a municipality to then switch to renewable energy as well. So I much prefer to answer questions and have other people prompt the direction of the conversation. So I'll stop there, but say again, thanks. Also, I should have said at the beginning, thanks for inviting me here today. I love this group and I love the opportunity to evangelize about the stuff that I dream and have nightmares about.
Thank you. So maybe we'll hear from Peter now about his experience up in Milo, and then we can get into questions, and I'm sure we have a lot. I know I do. So Peter, if you want to go ahead and talk about what it's been like in Milo.
We need to unmute you, Peter. Hang on. Can you unmute yourself?
I think I did. Yes.
You did it. Good job.
Okay,
Thank
wonderful.
you.
Yeah, I'm petrified here. I've not done this much. Anyhow, I'm late to the plate here. I wasn't aware of the meeting. Bob gave me a call this afternoon, said that he couldn't make it. And so I'm happy to talk about our side of life. As small towns go, it's like pulling teeth to make any headway economically. And it actually was 2014, I believe, when they first got in touch with us. But a private entity, partners out of Ireland, through Dirigo Solar, a lawyer group in Portland, approached us about a possibility of doing this. We had an industrial park that was languishing, very large, near 100 acres. It had been permitted, and all the groundwork for a solar project had been done in anticipation of perhaps having a private prison here. Now we're talking 15 years ago. But be that as it may, the property was basically all sand. There's no environmental issues with it and all that. So they approached us. I think Milo's is a little different than the community-based things and some of the stuff that's opened up of late with the Mills administration, which I applaud. But this one, Dirigo Solar had already had approval from the PUC for around 10 projects in the state of Maine to do these, and it was a guarantee for them. And I think within the ballpark of around 3.4 cents a kilowatt hour was guaranteed to this group for 30 years. There's some incremental adjustments to that time frame, but that letter was basically gave these folks the ability to go to investors to do a project of this size. It started out at somewhere around 5 or 6 gigawatts, and it ended up almost triple because of the availability of the land. And but it was a pulling teeth process from 2014. The LePage administration first moved, no support, and then in the middle of the process, the Trump administration came in and really deep sixed our progress because the bulk of the solar panels, which I believe I'm right, and there's approximately 65,000 solar panels in the park up here. So that's a big nut for them, and that kind of the tariffs on foreign products was a real deal killer for them. Big process. Bottom line, it's also a $60-70 million operation. It's unique in that they have the ability to shape their finances with that guarantee of 3.4. They had successful negotiations with it was Emera and now Versant, but essentially with Emera. They were very supportive. Some of the criteria that I think is the same in a lot of these big solar projects had to be a mile from a substation, and that speaks to the cost of infrastructure to get the electricity pumped back. It also has to have certain kinds of situations in the substation to pass that through without having to do a lot of manipulation of the voltage. There is a certain amount of that. But with that support and finally things got a little bit better, got down the line a ways. There was also and I believe it's a 5-year federal depreciation schedule for these type projects that is kind of huge for them. And so with the 3.4 guaranteed for the length of the contract and the ability to write down a tremendous investment, I think it made it good. Our location was, I think, above standard. Of the 10 projects that they sought for the state, Milo was like either number 1 or number 2, and I think we may not have gotten in quicker, but the project is much more extensive than any of the others. The best part of it is, in a sort of a global arena, is that this Emera or Versant, obviously their standard rate is set, and I think my bill is like between 6 and 7 cents a kilowatt hour for the power, and then the distribution is a different item. But so the Bangor Hydro or Versant or whoever's in charge there, essentially they're going to be able to pass a cost savings across their footprint because the Milo project will input a tremendous amount of electricity. And rather than the company's profit or a piece, a large piece going to the town, which really wasn't even possible at that point. It makes this very attractive to Emira. And along the way, I'm sure Tyler and a bunch of people will attest to the fact that the power companies across the country with solar are getting squirrely about how much of this will come down their pipeline. The metering situation in out west, they actually outlawed, metering for individuals. So, everyone was concerned about, this kind of thing. But I think the Milo project will be fine financially across the board, and there will be a benefit for Versant's customers, and there should be it ever so slight reduction, because they will be drawing all of the power at nearly half what they have to buy it elsewhere. So the community solar things, it sort of changed, and I wasn't paying attention to the time frame, but it kind of changed at an opportune time. Obviously, the Mills administration giving a heads up to this kind of thing, and the community things are a boon to, obviously, municipalities. I know of several private affairs that, now that they are allowed to have more partners and all of that, I'm seeing a fair amount of that happen. I talked to one of the Dirigo Solar guys when he was up here. It has been a while now, and there was some angst in the state, I guess, about the flood of these kinds of community projects. But be that as it may, it is obviously the premier way to deal with this, with electricity and the cost of solar, wind, all of that other stuff takes a back seat. So we're very happy. We, unfortunately or fortunately, we had a tight window to negotiate. They didn't have a lot of room to give us a large gob of money on the front end, so we had to take what we could out of ways. We obviously had to do a project for, I'm losing the term, tax breaks passed through the town, and we had to do a large deal for them with that. But that was sort of besides what we negotiated for the town's benefit. We still have the B&A Railroad down in Derby that has, in excess of 50 to 75 acres. And we have talked, before I got off the board, we talked about a community project down there, and we're trying to entice Dirigo Solar to maybe be interested in doing something like that. Same thing as Monson, putting it in the places. And if we could do something large enough, obviously our largest employers would be a place for us to go. So that's the long and the short. Questions, I'm too long-winded already. Any questions, feel free.
Okay, Bill. Can you unmute?
There we go.
There you go.
I noticed that there's a space, I think up around Sergeant Hill, that says something about a solar farm. Is that connected with the one on the other side of Milo?
No, that's a private one. And it's fairly big, the backside of that hill. But yes, that's the private one, and that's the only other one that I know of that's connected to this one. Again, this Dirigo Solar they're a big outfit. They did a bunch of this stuff in Great Britain and Ireland, and it's sort of different with that PUC guarantee and the depreciation write-off. It makes it so much easier for them. And even, it's a tremendous amount of money. I mean, $60 million is a lot of dough to put down. So they obviously they and their investors took us a long time. And, just jumping through little hoops and, all of the insurance backers and the investors backers. It was a long-term thing. And I was petrified the whole way that at the very end, things were going to be, going down the tubes. But they were very good. We gave them what they needed. They gave us what we needed for financials, and you know, I think, you know, I admonished them early personally that, you know, Maine's a small place and it wouldn't be very good for the Milo town leaders to find out later on that another town might have gotten a far better deal than us. And if we're going to be the flagship of their operation, they need to do what they can do for us. Whether that worked or not, I don't know, but
Right, right. Sue Stevens, were you trying to speak? Did you have your hand up earlier? Okay. I had a question about, you know, I don't know whether everybody on this call really understands how the financial piece flows, and particularly the issue of net metering. I don't know whether everybody here understands that, but I don't know whether you or Tyler want to address that, but it would be helpful for me to have a run through on what the implication of that is.
I'm sure Tyler would be the right one for this.
Okay. Can you unmute, Tyler?
There we go. Now I can. So yeah, and another thing I should have mentioned at the very beginning. So I have my own community solar farm that's out the back door here, that came online back in December. So it's very small. It's a 1 acre footprint. It's about 155 kilowatts. It serves 15 or 20 people. It's kind of like a friends and family solar farm, if you will. And it was the first project to come online under the new regulatory regime that passed in 2019. And it's one of those things that, yeah, I do this is my day job, but I also don't usually do every single piece of the project myself, right? We have a team. And so there was a lot of brain damage that was picked up along the way. And if I was to do it, entertain this notion of doing it again, I don't know that I would do it all myself again. But the system is operational. It's producing energy. People are getting bill credits. And I say all that because what we've done is we've had to break the path with CMP about how does this law that then gets turned into PUC regulations then get implemented by the utility and then become real on people's bills and bank accounts. And it is a disgusting process, to say the least. It is infuriating. I spent 2 hours just today with the firm that manages the subscribers in just today, the 3 different ways that CMP broke the law on handling just 1 month's worth of billing. So it is a nightmare scenario. That's a good setup to say that net metering is a very simple policy tool to credit the users of energy with the solar energy generation. The best example is, well, you can do this with a system that you have on your house, like Bill has, or you can do it on an offsite system like I have. The idea here is just that if there's a kilowatt hour of energy generated from a solar panel and it doesn't get used wherever it's generated, it goes into the grid, just like every other electron in the grid. That energy is metered, and CMP or Versant has a way to credit that bill, that energy, that kilowatt hour to a certain account. And it just adds up all the energy that was sent into the grid kind of on your behalf over the course of a month. And then it gives you those credits on your bill the next month. So in Bill's scenario, if he's not home during the day and his panels are producing a bunch of power, just sending it out into the grid, it meters all those kilowatt hours and deducts them against the power that he's using at night when he's home and cooking, etc. For all of my subscribers, there's no consumption on site, right? Because it's not connected to anything. All that power just goes straight into the grid, And CMP has a report that says, here are the 15 accounts that are associated with the solar project. This is the percentage of generation that gets applied to each of those accounts. And then those people then see those credits show up on their bill at the end of the month. Now, it's not the most sophisticated policy tool. It's gets attacked from both sides. It gets attacked from the utilities because they don't like crediting energy generation at the retail rate, right? Because the project in Milo, they're selling wholesale power, just like any other power plant. That's why it's 3 point something cents. What we're doing, we're sending energy into the grid, same solar energy, but ours is valued at 14.1 cents per kilowatt hour because we're offsetting residential users' consumption directly. And that's where the difference between community solar, net metering eligible projects and these bigger wholesale projects, that's where they bifurcate. So utilities really don't like buying energy for 3 cents and then giving somebody a bill credit for 14 cents. You can imagine that doesn't sit well with them. On the other hand, when you look at the grid services that are provided by distributed generation, and by distributed generation, we mean these smaller power plants that are kind of scattered throughout the grid. When you add up the total benefits of those systems, and that's not just the energy that's produced, but it's when it's produced, what time of the day, what time of the year, it's where is it produced on the grid. These are systems that are usually producing energy that's near where energy is consumed, right? It doesn't go into the substation and then out through the transmission wires and then go to some other town. It stays right in the town. It powers the town where the stuff is consumed. And that has a real benefit. That has a real benefit to the resiliency of the grid. It has an efficiency benefit because you're not losing electrons in the movement of that power along transmission lines, so on and so forth. So when you actually analyze the total net benefit of distributed generation, almost universally, its value is higher than the retail rate. So the utilities will say this is a subsidy to people who use solar. And the people who have these systems say, or analyze this, say, actually net metering is a subsidy to the power companies because they wouldn't be able to provide the same grid services for the same price that this power is generating at. So that's kind of a part, that's like a 100 level and a 200 level net metering assessment for you.
Yeah, yeah, there you go.
I had a question. So there are a number of bills in the legislature this session having to do with solar. Are there any that are standing out for you that, would actually accomplish something that's really, really needed?
Definitely. So, back in 2019, there were a couple big pieces of, there were 3 pieces of legislation that were related to solar. I'll mention 3 elements because those were really what unlocked the potential here. One is about tax benefits, or rather, one of the pieces of legislation clarified that solar systems are not going to get taxed. What that means is that if you build $1 million solar project on your property value is not going to go up by $1 million. So solar energy is now treated the same as all other business equipment. It's exempt from personal property taxes. So that gave kind of the regulatory or the taxation certainty to support the development of these projects. The other major issue was that one of the other bills really just removed 2 arbitrary limitations. So there was a cap before on the size of a project that could be built for community solar, and it was 660 kilowatts, which is call it 100 people. If it raised that cap to 5 megawatts. So that's the difference between going from like a 3-acre project to a 25-acre project, just as for order of magnitude. It also eliminated the cap on the number of subscribers that could be in a project. Previously, a shared solar project could only have 10 participants. Now there's an unlimited number of participants. So that means that that 10 number was just made up. It didn't represent anything. And then the third element here, and probably the most important one, is that prior to 2019, if you wanted to participate in a shared solar project, you had to be an investor in that project. You had to put money out of your pocket to buy that equipment. And this eliminated that requirement as well, so that it made it so that you could just subscribe like a Netflix subscription to a system. You don't have to be an owner in Netflix. You can just pay your monthly fee and you get your credits. That's opened the floodgates, right? Because on top of that, Maine has decently high electricity rates, and we have cheap land, and it was a bloodbath of land speculation, of developers running around securing the rights to land. What happened was, as I was checking as we were doing the intros earlier, I checked the interconnection queue for CMP. There's 650 projects in the interconnection queue just in CMP territory. That's more than PJM is like the big interconnection, the regional transmission organization that's like most of the mid-Atlantic and going westward a little bit. It's huge. We have more projects in Maine than this kind of 13-state regional transmission organization. And so what happened was the interconnection queues got flooded. And that 650 projects represents about 1.5 times of the total energy demand of the state of Maine. So when we talk about the transition to clean energy, for example, we used to talk about like how many decades, can we do it by 2100? Can we do it by 2050? Like we could do it tomorrow if CMP got out of the way and just process these applications. So and save people money in the process. So that's where we are right now. Now, a lot of the bills in the legislature are set up to address these concerns. In particular, Maine does not have a very robust electrical grid, right? With old wires, old substations. We don't have a lot of three-phase capacity, et cetera. So finding that spot like Milo, that's a gold mine right there, because it's the Goldilocks of all these pieces that fit together in a state that doesn't have very many of these sites. Now, what happens when you have all this congestion? This is like traffic, right? This is energy traffic on the grid. It's blocking out everybody else who wants to do these smaller projects as well. So as an example, we have a project with some schools, and we're just going to put solar on the rooftops of the schools. But because there's so many other projects that are all trying to interconnect at the same time, it's causing years-long delays, and it might cause hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars of grid upgrades that are required to connect these relatively small projects to the grid. So one of the really important pieces that the legislature is dealing with right now is trying to figure out how to prioritize what types of projects so that we can get these smaller ones through faster while we're sorting out the bigger issues with the bigger projects.
I have a question for you about that, Tyler, and I know Carol has a question too. Mike and Bill, my question is about that. You mentioned the issue of resilience and the fact that, and there's a lot been written about the fact that with climate change, there's a real value in having your power generated locally to avoid some of the problems that we've seen with the grid going down for various reasons. Do we have to remain in a situation where we are all connected to CMP or one of the big grid, or is there potential for actually interconnecting directly to the solar grid that is local and having basically a local grid? Is that a potential for a reality or not?
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. The issue is just that that's not what the grid was designed for, right? So, this is such an exciting space because so much is all happening at exactly the same time. It's making things possible that just were unimaginable 5 or 10 years ago. And not the least of which is the pace at which all this stuff is happening. So for the first time since the advent of the power grid, we're talking about power going both directions at the same time, right? The grid was designed to have a big power plant, whether it's a 50 megawatts of solar in Milo or a diesel bunker fuel powered plant down on the coast or a nuclear power plant. It doesn't matter the fuel source, but the grid is designed to have big power plants producing lots of energy all the time, send it through transmission wires, hit substations, turn it down to the street level power lines that we see, deliver it to the house, and then you turn on the light switch and the lights come on. And then you get a bill for that. That's how it's been designed and built for 100 years. Now what we're saying is, hey, well, we can also be producers in this system. We have the technology, and realistically, the technology itself has never been the problem in any of this stuff. It's always been policy fights between people who have the power and the money and don't want to give up the power and the money. The issue here is that the amount of solar or the amount of renewables or distributed generation that's being built out in the towns and cities where it's being consumed is just happening at such a pace that it's overloading the ability. It's not overloading the grid. It's overloading the ability of the engineers at the power companies to understand how all this stuff comes together. And that's where you see, I don't know if you saw in the news, there was one of the latest scandals at CMP was that they failed to do a certain assessment of the projects that wanted to connect. And they went back after we had all signed our contracts with them. And they said, oh, by the way, you're going to have to pay a couple $100,000 more, a couple $1 million more. And then when push came to shove, it was like, oh, actually, no, it's not that much. It's only a little bit of money. And the reality is that in many cases, this is not even, it's a zero. It's because they didn't have their act together, because they're not used to developing and maintaining a grid that works bidirectionally. They're used to protecting the status quo. That's how the whole infrastructure and the corporate culture is set up. So to answer your question, yes, technically all this stuff is possible. It's just a question of how do you prioritize grid upgrades to facilitate that type of smart grid versus just protecting the status quo. And it's a policy and a political argument. It's not a technical, and it's not a money argument either, because the capital is there tomorrow to deploy all this stuff.
Peter, did you have a comment that you were going to make on that topic?
Yes, I would briefly. I worked for the Bangor Hydro when I was going to college, and my father was a 44-year veteran of Bangor Hydro. And then I worked 30 years doing cable television. So I think the infrastructure or a separate grid issue is somewhat of a problem, because I mean, even now you have cable and telephone and power on poles, the distribution of all of those. And I think the only real, especially if it's a project that would be widespread across a community, in order to get, for instance, cable on a telephone pole that's owned by either the telephone company or the hydro, is very difficult, very costly. You have to engineer every pole with them. This project in Milo, they had 40-foot poles all the way up Main Street. They ended up putting around 40 65-foot poles, and all of the transfer, all of the hardware, reconductoring, and all of that. So from what I've seen with my workings with CMP and Bangor Hydro and other power companies, in order to get space on a pole, in order to distribute cable, for instance, was very expensive and very difficult. And they can make it even more difficult. To Tyler's comments, they have very little incentive other than the engineering and the make-ready money to do this, because they're not gaining anything other than a couple bucks on rental of a pole annually. So in order to make a community grid work without the existing power company, I just think would be a long reach. I think it would be a ways down the line. That may be ill-informed or underinformed, but I think that may be the problem.
I'll just say, you use the same infrastructure. It's just that they have to be forced to share, right? So we're not talking about running new lines, but making them facilitate a more dynamic use of the grid. You know, talk to like Premium Choice, for example, about running broadband, running fiber on the power on the telephone poles, and without question, the biggest headache in that whole process is getting permission from CMP to staple their cord to the pole, right? And why? Because they have no, like you said, they have no interest in doing that. But why does it happen? Well, because the legislature said you must do this. And it's the same with all of this stuff. It ultimately comes down to the legislature and the governor saying you will facilitate this, not do you think we should facilitate this?
Yeah. Well, listen, I noticed that Jack has come in, and I don't know whether there are a couple of questions still on the floor here. So I'm gonna turn to Carol. You have a question, and Bill is next. So it's Carol and Bill.
Yeah. Well, I was going to switch to a little bit different topic, so I'll hold my question for now, and Bill, you can go ahead, and then maybe we can hear from Jack, and then we'll go back to the discussion.
Okay, am I unmuted now? I got a couple of questions. One is a group getting together now to take over the existing power companies and turn them into a statewide co-op, I guess you'd call it. That, I suspect, would eliminate a lot of the fights over telephone poles. And the other thing is that we're about to get millions of dollars for infrastructure. And I think cable and copper for communications is probably dead, and fiber is the way to go. And I suspect that, you know, as we increase broadband, and we're going to have to find a big highway rather than having every individual company running fiber from pole to pole. So what do you think about that, Tyler, as we take over the power companies and maybe expand community fiber, you know, across the state, which I guess is the broadband part is a separate discussion, but you know, the mechanics of putting this stuff up on poles is a real political problem, or I guess a business problem. It's not a technical problem.
Yeah, no, totally. And it's funny because the renewables and broadband conversations frequently end up interwoven, and it ultimately just comes down to, and it's about infrastructure, right? And it's like, does your infrastructure, what purpose does your infrastructure serve? Who makes those decisions? And if the purpose of that infrastructure is to generate corporate profits, then you get one outcome. But if the purpose of that infrastructure is to do X, Y, or Z, then your decisions will facilitate that outcome. And you know, I'm a firm believer in consumer-owned utility, because at the end of the day, we have, you know, I think the straw man arguments about a government takeover or this or that, they don't hold much water when the status quo is just totally unacceptable, right? We're already in the worst case scenario where we're paying too much and getting too little, and it's hampering us in so many different ways that, you know, a year ago I was hopeful, but it didn't really feel like it had much legs. This year it's a totally different story, because CMP specifically has done itself no favors in the last 12 months. And yeah, we'll see. I texted with Vaughn yesterday, and I told him, I said, how do you file paperwork to run for the board of directors of the Pine State Power Company? Because I'm in on day one, but you got to win. The company's got to exist first.
Carol?
So Jack, would you like to tell us about your experience in Dover Foxcroft? You'll have to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we
Okay.
can hear you.
I apologize for signing on late. I came from another meeting, and I'm not sure of the previous ground covered on the topic, and I'll try not to be redundant. I'll kind of give an overview of where Dover Foxcroft is at, and leave some time for, you know, question and answer, and what, you know, in particular people might want to hear about. I can say personally that I really had a steep learning curve, because it was into the spring of 2019 when, you know, I'm just hearing about all these, you know, potential new legislation that would just, you know, mean, you know, so many changes to the opportunities with solar, but hadn't really had any prior experience with it, or really any, you know, understanding of how it all worked, other than every once in a while you'd see, you know, rooftop solar here or there, or hear about a farm. You know, the Milo project was well underway prior to 2019, obviously. But as things sort of, you know, progressed and became more, I guess, talked about, I was hearing a lot here at the local level from my board members that they really wanted to just see what opportunities, you know, were out there for the town. And so the learning curve began, I guess, and you know, talk to other municipal officials, and you know, just try to get an understanding of what sort of was possible. And so what we ended up doing was putting out a RFP for basically ideas on how the town could capitalize on a solar project. And so we basically learned that, you know, there are sort of the two aspects for a municipality. One is if there's a suitable site to actually locate a project within the town. If it's a town-owned property, then there would be lease income that would be available to the town as far as leasing the property over a 20-year or 20+ year period. And at the time, at the very early beginnings, we didn't quite understand that the way that the legislation was structured, that the actual installation would not be taxable if it was met a certain criteria, I believe, of less than 5 megawatts, or, you know, certain aspects. It wouldn't be taxable. So initially, we did go into it thinking that a local project would be taxable, as well as the lease part of it. But we also learned that, you know, the whole structure of the net energy metering credits that, you know, made it possible to for the town to buy those credits from another project, whether there was a local project or not. So as we moved into trying to pursue opportunities, we looked at probably the most suitable site for a solar project in terms of size, in terms of location and proximity to three-phase power, you know, access to the grid, and we kind of came down on the what's our airport is, you know, that would be a very suitable solar site. Problem is it's an airport, and, you know, would the community want to make that change from you know, the aviation aspect of it to you know, to a solar site. And so that was discussed thoroughly in the fall of 2019, and it was a resounding no, that you know, that having an airport, even though it's a grass strip airport and a you know, not, it's more recreational versus commercial, that the unique aspect of a community having an airport such as that was would far outweigh the you know, the investment in solar. That was kind of the determination that, you know, feedback we got, and the determination that the board had. So at that point, we were shifting gears to, well, would there be any other suitable sites in the community that the town owned? And also, would we just be able to participate in a project by entering into a long-term contract for net energy metering credits? And so we did look at some excess land that we had on the transfer station parcel. Problem is it's wooded, so it'd be some you know, development costs, you know, and really wasn't, you know, quite as ready to go permitting wise as the airport potentially would be. But then there's the whole question of, you know, would the grid handle, you know, that additional interconnect? You know, so at this point we're working with Revision Energy on these questions, and so at the same time we're looking at, well, is there an alternative site that we could look at developing? There, Revision had a site underway in Skowhegan where they're basically building a solar farm and trying to find buyers for the net energy metering credits. And so at that point, you know, looking at those two avenues, the fact that any site we were going to develop here as an alternative to the airport was going to be, you know, more time consuming and costly, more involved, and still the question of the interconnect capabilities was making, you know, the need to locate a site locally sort of less imperative than if we wanted to try to lock in a more predictable cost for energy by buying those credits through the Skowhegan project. So ultimately, that's the route we took. I don't think the town has ruled out, you know, at some point having a local project, but I think they're just, you know, it just needs to be feasible and make sense. I know that the Fair Association pursued a project on at the fairgrounds with some of their excess acreage, and I think that there's, you know, there is a project pending there. It looks like it's probably going to be carved up into a couple of phases. I'm not sure what the current status of that is. It hasn't really gone into formal permitting, but I think the whole interconnect question is really what's kind of holding things up. Is you know, what's the grid going to be able to handle versus not. And I think everybody's aware that there's a project going in right now that's been permitted locally by the planning board for the property in behind the Shaw's Plaza, and that was feasible because of its proximity to Route 15 and the three-phase power that exists right close by. And I believe that interconnect was accounted for. So it's I think it's in the pipeline to do at this point. But in terms of the cost savings that we are potentially looking at, there's obviously a cost to buying a credit throughout the contract, and then there's a value of the credit. So it's basically modeling at this point in terms of the cost versus what the value will be. It's my understanding that the value of the credits are set by the PUC, and we know what our cost is, in terms of year one versus subsequent years throughout the contract. But starting out, it's about a 33% differential between what we need to pay for the credit versus what it's worth. So that can change over time, but that's where we went into the contract, in terms of that cost differential. And one of the things that we did not do is we did not try to account for 100% of our usage and power in terms of buying credits to meet that, because over time that, if we use less power, we don't want to end up being under contract to buy more credits than we need. I mean, the credits are only as good as having an offset to use them, having a bill to use them on. So we went in at about 85% of our usage, so that if we naturally reduce how much power we use through efficiencies or whatever, we should still have credits available to offset costs and not strain any of that investment. So at that point, I will be happy to kind of move into any directions specifically that people would like to talk about.
Thank you very much, Jack. Are there questions for Jack, or questions from the other panelists to Jack, or comments?
I'll just comment that the project that Dover is a part of, it's a great project. Ultimately, the question, there are several moving parts with these types of community solar projects. You have to decide, well, just one linear piece here is like, the longer you're willing to commit to a project, the better deal you're going to get, generally speaking. And so Dover got a really good deal, right? 33% discount is that's the biggest I've ever heard of. Excuse me. So that's great. But most community solar subscriptions don't have any long-term commitment. And so basically what you're doing is you're trading, you're getting a smaller discount, usually between 10 and 15% on average, compared to your rates. But you have the option, you can just cancel that contract at any time. So that's kind of the lever there.
Yeah, we're in a 20-year contract, and we can renew for two additional 5-year terms, I believe, is the way we have it set up. And the modeling is just what it is. You don't know, but the modeling is looking at the potential for the value to increase 2%. We know that our cost is going to escalate at 1.5. So if the value of the credits go up at 1.5, then they're going to pretty much stay the same difference. If the value of the credits outpace, then we do better. If the value of the credit doesn't, then that 33% may narrow. But the key is that we have a level of predictability that we wouldn't otherwise have, just because we're when I mentioned that I was on a learning curve, I really was on a learning curve to try to understand what is a net energy metering credit and how does it work. And the light bulb didn't come on for me until I got the gift card analogy. It's basically like, okay, I'm going to sell you a gift card that's worth $100 and I'm going to charge you $70 for it. And as long as you are going to go grocery shopping at Hannaford and you're going to have at least $100 a month, to spend, then it's going to be worth it. But if you don't have, if you only have $50 and you're buying $70, you've stranded money, so it's that, that analogy was fun. Like, okay, I get it now. We're basically pre-buying credits, and you just have to be comfortable that you would have a use for them. It should be actually needing that much energy. But we didn't want to try to buy out to 95% of what we thought we needed. We wanted to stay in a more conservative range, and it just means that we don't have that percentage offset for 100% of what we're going to do. But that's okay. We're just trying to be conservative at the same time as trying to be predictable, I guess, and what our costs might be.
Well, thanks, Jack. Carol, Eric has his hand up. Do you want to talk first? I don't know what.
No, Eric can go.
Eric, you can unmute. Okay.
Thank you. My question is for Tyler and Peter. I'm just curious on your projects, both the larger municipal ones and in Tyler's case, even your smaller one. Do these projects just produce energy and it goes into the grid and you're changing, you come and go? Is there any attempt for storage capacity? Does that come into play at all?
Well, I'll go first. In our case, I misspoke. It's around a 21 megawatt system there. And I did speak to the folks about that, and battery storage and all that's getting better. But for this purpose, it's a direct shot right to the utility. And it would have to be a lot smaller, I think, to have any advantage.
Tyler, did you want to respond to that, or you unmute?
Yeah. The storage question is, again, entirely about policy. So one of the interesting things in this space is that if you look at like how quickly the cost of solar panels has declined over time, in the last like 10 years or so, it's declined like 90%. Even when I started working at UGE, it was 2013, and we were selling solar panels. At that time, they were about $1.27 per watt. And as of a month or so ago, they're about 30 cents per watt. So that's just in that time, and they're even cheaper in other countries. Peter mentioned the impact of tariffs. The same panel, same exact product we buy for a project in Monson, Maine, and a project in the Philippines where we have a team is twice as much in the US, and it's entirely tariff driven. The cost curve decline for storage is even faster than what happened for solar panels. So we're basically at cost competitiveness. Now, for what? It depends on what is the price of the energy that you're trying to offset. So that's one factor here. The more expensive the electricity is, then the more cost effective it is to store some of those electrons in batteries. Another piece is rate structure. So how do you get charged? So like residential consumers, we use a kilowatt hour, we buy a kilowatt hour. It doesn't matter how many you buy, it doesn't matter when you buy them. You could buy them all in 1 minute. You could just turn on a big machine in your garage. It doesn't cost you any more than if you had a slow burn 24 hours a day. Whereas commercial off-takers pay demand charges, right? They count that spike. What is the biggest spike? And then you get charged for that spike for the next month, and then they do the same thing again. And so they really it pays to depress that peak, and you can depress that with storage, for example. Other states don't use net metering as a policy. They use a value stack that incorporates things like the value of certain energy at certain times of the day and so on and so forth. And so then you'll get an incentive payment for including storage in your solar project to help smooth that grid, especially in California. Almost all the projects in California now have storage included, and it's very cost effective just because of how the rates are structured. Moving forward, you're going to see almost all projects have storage included one way or another. And then once the rules change, you're going to see a lot of projects retroactively add storage afterwards. So the projects right now are being built without storage because there's no monetary, there's no fiscal incentive to do so. There's no way for those project owners to basically sell the services that the batteries provide into the grid in a competitive way. Once they get allowed to do that, and that is happening, but once they get allowed to do that, you're going to see a lot more storage integration here.
Thank you, Tyler. Carol, you unmute?
Got it. So this is great, a great segue, because I have this dream that we'll have solar powered EV chargers throughout the state. Yeah, but that would require storage. So is that feasible that we could have solar powered electric vehicle charging stations sometime in the next 10 years?
The short answer is no. And the reason for that is because in order to generate the amount of power, the amount of instantaneous power that you'll need to charge a car quickly, you would need a lot of solar panels, basically. And you would need storage because you would need to guarantee that that energy is available at that time. So you see a lot of car charging stations that have like solar carports over them or solar panels near them. You can incorporate the technologies, but the solar panels are not directly charging or powering the charging stations.
I see. Okay, one more question about storage and batteries. We know they're lithium batteries, is that correct?
Most,
sorry?
Most, yeah.
I had a conversation with someone the other day, and his objection was that lithium batteries are going to become a huge waste product. So, do you want to comment on that?
I mean, yeah. Eventually, you're going to have to figure out we're going to have to recycle a lot of this stuff, certainly.
Can they be recycled?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much
Currently?
it can be recycled. It's just a question. Again, all these things, just like general recycling, recycling's in a slump right now, right? Why? Because the policies don't promote recycling. And at the end of the day, it's all about who's making the rules and how are they structuring them and who do they benefit. So what happens with lithium is going to be the same thing with what happens with all these solar panels 50 years from now. Well, I lose zero sleep over this topic because we're going to figure it out. And then at the end of the day, it's also the flip side of this is compared to what, right? Like, yeah, 50 years from now, you're going to have a bunch of old solar panels you got to figure out what to do with. But the alternative is to use fossil fuels, and that puts us in a much worse situation than having a stack of solar panels somewhere.
Yeah, that I'd like to just segue it to a topic that I think is important here, which is that one of the things we've been talking about on the equity subcommittee is how to evaluate the changes that need to happen. And there are kind of two buckets. There are technical changes that we know how to fix. We know there are things you can measure. There are things we know how to do them. We know what the timeline is. And then there are systemic things that require actually being creative, sometimes taking some risks and changing things in ways that we actually may not have even conceived of yet. We don't even know the right questions to ask. And I think we're on the cusp of changes that need to happen in the system in order for all of these great ideas to really come to full fruition. But we can't just rely on what we already know. We have to be asking the questions and be willing to evolve. And there's an evolution here that's happening, as you say, Tyler, quite quickly. But I think we have the system and how we measure things and how we bill for things and what we believe is the exchange of money or whatever back and forth. All of that stuff is, I think, up for grabs. I think it's all different. So I have one other question, but are there other questions before I ask my other question? Not hearing any. No hands. Well, I have a question that is very simple, which is, I think it's simple. I have a CMP bill and I have signed up for green energy, which I'm getting from someplace, and it's not all solar. It's all a mixture of things. It's got percentages of various things that make it green. And now they're promoting these community solar projects. I can't, and they're not local. So my question is, should I wait? I mean, I want to know, number one, if I buy into a community solar project, are they happy to have my money? Am I helping to make community solar a reality? Because I like to do things that are good for the community. And does it make a difference whether I buy into a community solar project in, Dover, Foxcroft, or Milo, or someplace close by? Or should I just as easily do what Jack has done and go to Skowhegan, or maybe go to Boston? Does it matter where you buy your community solar? So that's my simple question.
I want to go last because it's actually the most complicated question.
Then you better start.
Well, okay.
I'm certainly not sure. Yeah.
Between Jack, Peter, and I, it's really interesting, right? There are three very different three different scenarios here. To your point, Leslie. And so if you're signed up right now to Maine Green Power through an adder to your CMP bill, what you're doing is you're buying renewable energy credits and they're adding them to your bill. So you're consuming regular energy, which may or may not be green depending on the hour of the day. And you are then you're purchasing the green attribute to somebody else's renewable power. So then you can say that you're using the green element of that power. These community solar projects are what you're doing. You're not buying the community solar projects generate two things of value. They generate energy in the form of kilowatt hours, and they generate green attributes in the form of renewable energy credits. When you subscribe to a community solar project, you're generally only buying the power, the kilowatt hours. The owner of the project keeps those green attributes and they sell them to somebody else. So they're earning twice here. And so it's just a question, is it more important to you to have cheaper, to get a discounted energy price per kilowatt hour? Or would you rather have that green attribute? Now, I am not aware of any single community solar project in Maine, save one, that lets the subscribers keep the renewable energy credits, because this business model is not sell green power, it's earn money by selling power. So the exception is my project, because since I do this professionally, I was able to make a project that probably shouldn't exist in the private sector exist. And we were able to squeeze out the margins out of the project so that we could still offer a small discount to the subscribers, but we're not selling the RECs. So rather than give our subscribers a 10 or 15% discount on the power and then sell the RECs separately, we said, we'll give you a 5% discount on the power, and we'll keep the RECs. Now, we didn't do that contractually, because what we're doing is, this is a very marginal project economically. Ain't nobody getting rich off of this. And I tell you what, when I look out the window and see the solar panels, I was hoping that when this happened, I would be like super excited to have a solar farm in my backyard. And it's just a constant source of anxiety now and for the next 20 years, because we're riding here very close to the line, because it's designed to break even basically. So when things go well, everything's great. When things don't go well, we might get into trouble down the line. So we're using the RECs as like an escape valve. You know, in the event that we have problems with CMP and we can't pay our mortgage on the system, then we'll sell the RECs to get us out of a hole. But the system is designed to keep the renewable energy attributes with the subscribers themselves. So your question is a good one, and it's very complicated. I suspect that what's going to happen in the state of Maine is that there will be such a flood of projects coming onto the grid in years to come that there will be pricing pressure on the credits themselves. So I suspect that the discount that the developers are willing to give will go up a little bit. This is pure speculation, but won't be surprised if the value of the renewable energy credits also goes down, because there's such a supply of them, that then some of the developers or the project owners are willing to leave the credits with the subscribers, because they're just not worth that much in the open market anymore. But that's an open question, and there's no data behind that.
Thank you. Carol, do you want to wrap up? Do you want to have, are there any other questions? Because we have a few more minutes.
I was just going to say that to your question, Leslie, just that, you know, the fact that if somebody's buying power from a community solar project, they're supporting the creation of RECs. You know, that's kind of the way I look at it, is whether you keep them or not, you're supporting a project that is creating those RECs. And so I think that's just kind of a broad way to look at what you're supporting with your choice of where you get your power. And you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's just, I think it gets really complicated quickly. And I just wanted to mention too that the distance we are from the Skowhegan project, we're limited to anything within the CMP service area, because we're buying a credit that CMP that has to be used in the CMP district. We're a customer of CMP, so it has to be a project in their district. That's just a way that we understand that the PUC set this up. So we couldn't participate in a project that was in somebody else's district. So it's kind of limited us that way.
Thanks, Jack. Bill, you had your hand up. You can unmute. Good.
Yeah, we've been talking about solar generation, alternative energy generation. And we haven't talked about the users, you know, how we use electricity. And, you know, I've got some solar panels here and got solar electric, solar hot water. And we use a lot of energy. We're here all the time and we got lots of stuff running. What I don't have is a utility management program. You know, it seems to me that we need to be looking at how residents and business manage their electricity. And I suspect that this could be done. If we can have Siri and Alexa and, all these other applications, I don't know why we can't monitor our electric usage. And as I think somebody might have mentioned, that different times of the day, power is more expensive than other times of the day. So, with automated systems, I mean, my damn stove has got an internet connection. So, maybe I could do some cooking at midnight or something. But, can I put a computer on my service entrance and manage, what I've got here?
Yeah, this is my world. This is my world, Bill. You're speaking my language. So in 2009, I was at the UN climate conference in Copenhagen, which at the time was billed as the last hope for humanity to come to an internationally brokered deal to replace the Kyoto Protocol. Well, it fell apart spectacularly. But what I remember from that, aside from actually getting slapped in the face by a French diplomat, which is a story I'll save for another day, was going to a side event. It was like a smart home side event where they were talking about this. They were saying like, well, in the future of the smart home, all your appliances will be connected to the internet and everything will be programmable, and you can run your washing machine at night when power prices are negative, and you can do all these different tweaks so that you're both saving money and kind of balancing the grid, which are ultimately one and the same, right? If we had a direct link to kind of residential energy use, or all energy use, that reflected kind of the price curves and the supply and demand of everything, and the environmental and societal factors that are part of power production, et cetera. If you could weave all these elements together, then you could build a network that was way more efficient, right? Because our whole grid is built on peak power production. You build a system that is designed to allow everybody to turn everything on at exactly the same time, and then you add some reserve capacity on top of that and hope for the best. That's essentially what the system is. And incredibly inefficient and incredibly uncost effective. But that's what it is. And so flash forward to 2021, I just bought a new washing machine a couple months ago. And yeah, it was, and I'm shopping for some new kitchen appliances now, and everything is Wi-Fi enabled. Everything is smart this, smart that. And I'll go back to the thing I keep talking about is like, we just don't have the policies to allow this to come to fruition, because we don't have time of use electricity pricing. We don't have these sort of incentive programs that will draw people to use energy more intelligently. Efficiency Maine is a world-class agency. They do a lot of excellent work, but they're limited by the direction that the legislature provides them and the funding that the legislature provides them, and so on. So we just don't have the policies in place that allow the technology that already existed in 2009. This is not a new thing. And the market mechanisms, and I'm not a free market dude by any stretch of the imagination, but this is one area where we really need to be a lot smarter about how these pieces come together to allow us to accomplish what we conceptualized more than a decade ago.
Well, I want to thank Tyler and Patrick and Jack for coming and spending time with us. I learned a lot, and very knowledgeable, all of you. And it's great to hear from people who have everyday experience with what's going on with solar right in our community. So we'll continue on with our Earth Week series tomorrow. We have two programs at 3:00 in the afternoon. We will hear from Todd Martin from NRCM, Natural Resources Council of Maine, He will be talking about the future of transportation in Maine. And then at 6 o'clock, we have Matt Scott from Dave's World to talk to us about energy efficiency through the use of heat pumps.
Thank you, everybody.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So.
Bye.
Good night.